The number one request that we get from our clients when we are designing a new website sounds something like, is my logo too small? Can you make my logo a little bit bigger? I don't think my logo is viewable enough. And today we're going to talk about why, no, we don't need to make your logo bigger. Here's why. So over time, I've put a lot of thought into why we get this request so much. Why do people think that logos need to take up such a huge portion of their homepage? And I believe that the answer is to do with branding in general and how branding is handled in popular culture. So if you're watching a movie or even reading a news article that talks about branding, most likely the one thing that is discussed the most, of course, is the logo. Talk about Apple's brand, all you think about is, that little image of the apple with the bite taken out of it. I think part of the reason that this is so focused on is that the logo is really a solid thing that you can latch onto and understand that this is a visual representation of the brand, whereas some of the other things that have to do with brands are a little bit harder to kind of get into. So today I really want to break down, from my opinion, what is all in a brand, so we can start to understand how a brand takes form on a website, that sort of thing. So first I'll touch on what we do know. So logos, yes, they are absolutely an important part of every brand. All of the important brands in the world have a logo that you can recognize in an instant, and that's kind of the point I wanted to bring it up first. The power of a logo itself does not come from how really well it's designed or whether or not it includes everything to do with your business in one little image. It comes from a long time of associations. The more people can see your logo or a big brand's logo, the more they start to associate it with the experiences that they have with that brand, which is why when you look at a logo, depending on how you feel about that business, you might really like what that logo looks like. You might immediately get a feeling in your gut of like, oh, that's not a company that I like to work with. Color scheme is another really important part of a brand. When you are looking at people's websites, their ads, you're going to see a lot of specifically the colors they use in their branding. Hey, it's me in the future. So I'm editing the video that you are watching, and I realized that I say that FedEx's colors are brown like probably 30 times, and UPS is brown, and FedEx is this kind of orange and purple, blue, purple. Yeah, so I apologize in advance for that. Think of any FedEx truck you see, you're gonna see that very specific color of brand. If you saw commercials for FedEx, they would include that same brown in there. This, of course, also helps those general associations because we like what is familiar. So the more we can see about a brand that could, starts to link things together with what we know. I see this brown color when they deliver my product, and then I see a commercial. These things all come together to add to my impression of that brand. Quick design note about colors. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that everything you do should only have the one specific color that's in your brand. We actually fell into that problem ourselves, I think, with our last website rebuild, and it ended up looking very flat because we had white and we had our Yaz blue, and that was it. We needed to add some other slightly different shades of blue, some other accent colors. That's kind of when we introduced orange, and we use a lot more grays in between so things look more lively and, I guess, not monotone. Design guidelines are up next. So your logo and your colors are also included in your design guidelines, but again, I wanted to separate those out because they have, at least in my opinion, a very important role that they play on their own. So when I'm talking about design guidelines, I'm talking about the other stuff like the typefaces and fonts that are used, whether or not the images, visuals, or what you're seeing is consistent. So if you have a lot of drawn graphics on your website, keep with that theme of having drawn graphics. Don't start including live photography. If you have live photography, don't necessarily switch gears to do something else, because again, these are things people are going to start getting used to. I'm not saying don't experiment, but every time you change something as important as the style of images you're using or the fonts. Fonts are something that people might not even think that they notice, but they do. I mean, I guess only speak for myself in that regard. When I talk about consistent images, another thing that I want to point out that I didn't know until I worked here, I'm going to have the image right here above my hand. There are like different kinds of lighting that you can even have in images. So you should see an image of like these two stock photos of running shoes. One of them has more yellow light. I think it's more like morning time, and one of them has more white light, which I think comes from when it's a little cloudier and the light's diffused. You can tell when a website has all images with a white light or one that has mixed up, and it starts to feel inconsistent, even though you might not be able to pick out what that difference is. Now we're going to talk about the parts of your brand that are not as visible. So I want to start with your values, mission statement, and vision statement. So these are all kind of just the general wording guidelines. You'll see a lot of companies have them, and when done right, they can be a very important part of your brand, because that can tell not only your customers but also your own employees what your team, what your company values. If you are a company that really values like saving the environment, you should have values that reflect that. You should have a mission statement and vision statement that have that as part of what you are trying to accomplish. So you can get everybody on your team on the same page, so you have a consistent story that's being told. Any employee that you have, whether or not they are still an employee or have left, they should be able to tell other people, and your customers as well should be able to tell other customers that this is a message that your company believes in and follows, and that becomes such a huge, important part of your brand. Communication guidelines. So that pretty much deals with the way that your company communicates with clients, team members, and the general public. So this is going to be like the tone of voice you use when you're posting on social media, the way that you talk to customers, on the phone, in person, by email. These things should all follow guidelines as well that kind of does match back to things like your values, so that people are still getting a very consistent experience when they're dealing with you. You wouldn't want to have one customer that's like, these are the nicest people I've ever dealt with, and have another one be like, no, they all completely ignored me, they were rude to me. Of course, you can't control necessarily every customer's experience. Sometimes you might have like a busy day and they might feel ignored, but it should be something that you are striving to have consistent messaging overall. The way that your website content sells your products or services should be the same way that you sell your products or services when somebody sees you in person. Your customer experience is a really important part of your brand that you may or may not be aware of that it is a thing. So for example, when I walk into, say a mall, when you go near the food court, a lot of malls will have like a Cinnabon or Cinzio, some place that makes cinnamon buns. Now, why do I bring this up? Because they've actually put a ton of research into the fact that if they are in an enclosed space like a mall, the smell increases their sales by huge margins, whereas if they have a standalone shop outside of a mall, people are less likely to go there because it's not necessarily food that you think about ahead of time, like I want to go get cinnamon buns, but when you're walking through a mall and you can smell that, you're like, yeah, this sounds good to me. So smells is just one of the things that is to the overall customer experience. Of course, all the stuff that I've talked about already, like your visual branding, your communication, those are all part of the customer experience too. But I wanted to touch on some of the other things that, again, you might not think about. So how light or dark your store is, if you do have a storefront. A website as well. If you have a really dark themed website, people are going to perceive it differently than one that has a lot of whites and is bright. You'll notice restaurants very often have darker lighting and louder music, and I've read a few different studies as to why they do this. One of the oldest that I read that I thought for the longest time was the only truth was that they wanted to get people in and out of there faster. But the most recent studies that I've read, and I'll have some links to some examples in the blog attached to this video, so some more recent examples is that listening to loud music and dark lighting actually makes people want to eat and drink more. So again, these are things that you might not think are important, but if you can take advantage of them and cater the experience to a customer that you want them to have every time, that all becomes a big part of your brand as well. And finally, let's talk about your perceived brand. So your perceived brand rolls up everything that we've already talked about and puts it in the hands of your customers. So what's important about this is if you work really hard to give yourself a consistent brand with everything that I've talked about, and that's not the experience your customers are having, then the thing you think is your brand is not. So if you say that you are a really eco-friendly business and then some news comes out that you've been spilling toxic waste down the sewer, something crazy like that, people are going to start to see that just because you say that you are a certain way, their experience with you and what they're reading about you is different. And so being a company that spills toxic waste down the sewer becomes more of your brand than your eco-friendly messaging. So this is one of the biggest reasons that people also look at things like reviews. They want to see what experience other people are having because they can very generally expect that they're going to have the same experience. So always something that you want to be aware of. You can tell people a million times what you think your business is about, and if that's not what they're experiencing, then that really isn't your brand at the end of the day. So to wrap up, your logo does not need to be bigger on your website. Yes, it is an important part of your brand, but there are so many other pieces that are going into your brand that are going to make your logo more powerful. People should be able to see your logo, yes. On most websites you go to now, you can see it up in the top left. That's a pretty standard position for it. When you click on it, you expect to go to the home page. These are all things that we've all collectively learned, as like a society. But if you think that your logo is the only piece of your brand that people are going to get a sense of who you are from, please consider the other things that I've said. Put more work into that overall experience, because a brand on itself is, a logo on itself is just an image. Your brand really does come down to every single experience people have with your business. So if your logo is taking up half of your page, that's a huge portion of your page that could be helping them find their answers, make a sale, get them to be a repeat customer, and you are much better off doing all of that stuff than saying, look at my logo, it's important, which as I say that, I frame my logo behind me. This is my poster, not my website. If you go to my website, my logo is very small. I just wanted this here because otherwise you just be looking at this blank beige wall. I'm sure we'll get better stuff, as my plant keeps growing. So that's all I have for today. Let me know what you think about brands. I'm sure there are things that I missed as far as what goes into a brand that some other professionals might know of that might not be as either important or obvious to me. Otherwise, please like, comment, and subscribe to our very early growing channel. We really want to equip people with the knowledge that they need to succeed with their new businesses and marketing, whether they're building their own website or talking to a company like ours. You should have as much information as you can to make sure that your website project or any marketing project, branding app is successful. So do me that favor. Otherwise, if you have any questions or concerns for me directly, you know where to find me. And we will talk to you in the next one. See ya.